The words hit me like a physical blow, not with the force of a punch, but with the cold, sharp precision of a stiletto sliding between my ribs. He said, "You're fired," just like that. After 22 years, after a lifetime spent drawing lines that became skylines, after pouring my soul into the concrete and steel of this city, it was over in less than 10 seconds. My name is Rebecca, and for more than 2 decades, I was the chief architect for Sterling Construction, a name once synonymous with integrity, a name I helped build. We were known for our landmark public spaces, the museums, the concert halls, the libraries that formed the cultural heart of the metropolis. We were on the verge of bidding for the Olympia Gateway project, the largest and most ambitious public works initiative in the city's history. It was my design, my vision, the culmination of my entire career, and my supervisor, Ezra, a man who couldn't tell a cantilever from a corbel, had just erased me from my own life's work. If you've ever poured your entire identity into your work, only to have it snatched away in an instant, let me know in the comments. It's a strange and isolating feeling, and it helps to know you're not just screaming into the void. He sat there, behind the massive oak desk that once belonged to the firm's founder, Arthur Sterling. The desk felt obscene with him behind it, like a gargoyle sitting on a cathedral altar. He didn't even have the courage to look me in the eye. His gaze was fixed on some invisible point on the wall just over my shoulder. He said, "We're restructuring for the Olympia bid. We need a new approach, fresh blood." He mentioned performance issues, a phrase so absurd, so utterly disconnected from reality, that for a moment I felt a dizzying sense of unreality, as if the floor had dropped out from under me. Performance issues. I was the one who had won Sterling its last 12 design awards. I was the one who personally salvaged the disastrous Riverfront Pavilion project after his fresh blood hire nearly got the whole thing condemned. I was the foundation, the steel frame, and the load-bearing walls of that entire firm. Ezra was just the cheap, gaudy facade, slapped on at the end to take the credit. I knew the real reason. It was simple, and it was ugly. I had been flagging the shortcuts, the dangerous, cost-cutting measures he'd been implementing for years, slowly at first, then with increasing audacity. The substandard materials, the faked inspection reports, the structural calculations he'd pressured junior engineers to fudge. I saw it all, and I documented it all. I had raised my concerns, quietly at first, in memos he ignored, then more forcefully, in meetings he'd cut short. I was a problem he couldn't solve, a witness he couldn't intimidate. The Olympia Gateway project was going to be his magnum opus, his ticket to a legacy he hadn't earned. The level of scrutiny would be unprecedented. He couldn't risk having me in the room, asking the wrong questions, looking too closely at the numbers. He thought firing me, smearing me with the vague stain of performance issues would be enough. He believed it would silence me. He believed the truth would be buried under a mountain of HR paperwork and a non-disclosure agreement he slid across the desk, a final, pathetic insult. He thought he could erase 22 years of my life and build his glorious future on the rubble. He was wrong. What he didn't know was that I had copies. I had copies of everything. Every suppressed report, every compromised inspection, every pleading email from a site foreman I'd secretly saved. I had a meticulous, cross-referenced archive of his corruption, a blueprint of his decay. He thought he was just firing an architect. He had no idea he was arming an enemy, and I was about to take my evidence to the one group of people he couldn't bully, bribe, or fire, the city's oversight committee. Sterling Construction wouldn't just be disqualified from the bid. I was going to make sure they were investigated, audited, and dismantled, piece by corrupt piece. This wasn't just about my job anymore. This was about the safety of every person who would one day walk through a public space built on a foundation of lies. And it was about reclaiming the legacy he had stolen, not just from me, but from the man whose name was still on the door. The walk from Ezra's office to my own felt like wading through deep water. Every step was a monumental effort. The air in the hallway, usually buzzing with the quiet energy of creation, felt thick and suffocating. The sounds of keyboards clicking and plotters humming seemed to come from a great distance, like noises from a world I no longer belonged to. My office, a corner space with a view of the skyline I had helped shape, looked alien. The models of my past projects, the library, the museum, the concert hall, sat on their shelves like ghosts of a former life. For 22 years, this room had been my sanctuary, my command center. Now it was just a box with a window. I sat down in my chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. My hands were trembling, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor. I clasped them together on my desk, to still them. My gaze fell on a framed photograph on the corner of my desk. It was of me and Arthur Sterling, taken a decade ago, at the ribbon cutting for the Grandview Art Museum. Arthur, the firm's founder, was a giant of a man, both in stature and in spirit. He had a booming laugh and hands like shovels, but his touch on a drafting pencil was as delicate as a surgeon's. He was my mentor. He hired me straight out of school, saw something in my portfolio, a spark of audacity he called it, that reminded him of himself. He taught me that architecture wasn't just about buildings, it was about civic responsibility. He used to say, "Rebecca, we're not just building structures, we're building trust. People will live, work, and raise their children in the spaces we create. They trust us with their safety, their lives. That trust is sacred." Ezra was Arthur's son-in-law, a finance guy who married into the business and inherited the throne when Arthur passed away from a sudden heart attack 5 years ago. Ezra saw buildings not as public trusts, but as entries on a spreadsheet: profit and loss, margin and risk. He viewed Arthur's obsession with quality and integrity as a charming but inefficient relic of a bygone era. The transition was subtle at first: a cheaper supplier for non-structural steel, a slightly less robust waterproofing membrane, small compromises, almost invisible to the naked eye, but I saw them. I saw them in the material specs, in the change orders, in the margins he was so proud of. I remember the first time I confronted him. It was over the foundation for the Westgate Community Center. The soil report indicated a need for deep-drilled piers, an expensive but necessary precaution given the high water table. Ezra's team came back with a value-engineered proposal for a shallow raft foundation. It was cheaper, faster, and in my professional opinion, borderline negligent. I walked into his office with the geotechnical report and the revised plans. I laid them out on his desk. I said, "Ezra, we can't do this. This is a 100-year building in a floodplain." Arthur would have never signed off on this. He just smiled that placid, infuriating smile of his. He leaned back in Arthur's chair. He said, "Rebecca, you're the best architect in the city, but you're not an accountant. The numbers work. The city's inspector will sign off. He knows which side his bread is buttered on. It's fine." It was the casual, confident corruption that chilled me. The assumption that everyone had a price, that every regulation was merely a suggestion. I fought him on it. I wrote a formal memo, citing the specific codes he was violating, the potential for catastrophic failure in a seismic event. He intercepted it. The memo never made it to the client or the city. Instead, he called me into a meeting with the junior engineer who had drafted the new foundation plan. The kid, barely 25, looked terrified. Ezra put a hand on his shoulder and said, "Tell Rebecca what you told me, son. Tell her how your new design is perfectly safe, an innovative new approach that saves the client millions." The boy stammered through the talking points, his eyes pleading with me. I could see the truth in the sweat on his brow, in the way he refused to meet my gaze. Ezra was using him, just as he was using all of us. He was creating a culture of complicity. He was making us all party to his lies. I should have left then. I know that now. Any sane person would have walked away, but I thought about Arthur. I thought about the legacy he had entrusted to all of us. I saw myself as the last line of defense, the firewall protecting the sterling name from the man who was actively trying to destroy it from within. It's a debatable logic, I admit. It was a kind of professional arrogance, a belief that my presence alone could hold back the tide of his greed. It was a misguided loyalty, so I stayed. And for the next 4 years, I fought him on every project. I became the voice of dissent in every planning meeting, the annoying conscience he couldn't get rid of, and I started my archive. It began as a way to protect myself, a professional CYA file. Every time he overruled a safety concern, I documented it. I saved the original engineering report and the doctored one he submitted. I took discrete photos on site of shoddy rebar work or improperly cured concrete. I created a separate, encrypted folder on a personal hard drive at home. I called it my Black Ledger. It was a chronicle of Sterling Construction's slow-motion suicide. The sound of my office phone ringing jolted me back to the present. I stared at it, the red light blinking insistently. I didn't answer. It was probably security, telling me they were coming to escort me from the building, to take my keycard, to supervise me as I packed my personal effects into a cardboard box. The final, ritual humiliation. My gaze drifted back to the models on the shelf, the intricate lattice work of the concert hall roof, the soaring glass atrium of the library. My hands had drawn those lines. My mind had solved those structural puzzles. These weren't just buildings to me, they were my children, and he was trying to make me a stranger to them. A wave of something cold and heavy washed over me. It wasn't anger yet. It was a profound, bottomless grief. The grief of a 22-year love affair ending in a brutal, unexpected betrayal. I leaned forward, my head in my hands, and for the first time since Arthur died, I let the professional mask slip. In the silence of my soon-to-be former office, surrounded by the ghosts of my own creations, I cried. The tears were hot and silent. They weren't for the job, not really. They were for the lost time, for the wasted loyalty, for the naive belief that integrity could ever win a battle against pure, unadulterated greed without a fight. As I sat there, a notification pinged on my personal cell phone, a text message. It was from Leo, a young architect I had mentored for the last 3 years, a brilliant kid, with a fire for design and an almost painful sincerity. He was the kind of architect Arthur would have loved. The message was short, just 3 words. He knows, I'm sorry. My blood ran cold. He knows. Ezra knew about the ledger, but how? I had been so careful. I never accessed it from the office network. I never spoke of it to anyone. My mind raced, sifting through possibilities. Had I let something slip? Was my home network compromised? And then the sickening realization dawned on me. Ezra didn't know about the ledger. Not my ledger, anyway. He knew that I knew. He was firing me not just to silence me for the future, but to discredit my knowledge of the past. The performance issues smear was the first step. The next step, I realized with a jolt of fear, would be to create a narrative that I was a disgruntled employee, a fabricator of lies, a saboteur. He would need evidence, and he would turn to the people I had trusted, the people I had trained, and he would squeeze them. He would squeeze Leo. Leo was in a tough spot. His father had early onset Alzheimer's, and the cost of his care was astronomical. Leo's salary, and more importantly, the company's premium health insurance, was all that was keeping his family afloat. Ezra knew that. Ezra knew everyone's pressure points. That was his real talent. He wasn't a builder. He was a demolition expert of the human soul. The text message, "I'm sorry," wasn't just an apology. It was a warning. Ezra had likely already called him in, pressured him, threatened him. He'd probably asked Leo to go through my old project files, my emails, to find anything that could be twisted, anything that could be used to build a case against me. He was trying to poison the well, to retroactively justify my dismissal and inoculate himself against anything I might say. The grief that had filled me just moments before began to recede, replaced by a slow, rising heat. It was the cold fire of resolve. He wasn't just attacking me anymore. He was going after my people. He was trying to corrupt a good kid like Leo, forcing him to choose between his conscience and his family. The thought of Leo, with his earnest face and his passion for honest work, being put in that impossible position, it was a line Ezra had just crossed. My trembling hands became still. My vision, which had been blurred with tears, became sharp and clear. I looked at the photograph of me and Arthur again. I could almost hear his voice, that deep, rumbling baritone. He used to tell me, "Rebecca, The strongest structures have the deepest foundations. You can't build anything lasting on sand or lies. For years I had tried to shore up the foundations of sterling construction from the inside. I had patched the cracks, braced the walls, hoping to save the house that Arthur built. Now I realized my mistake. The house was condemned. The foundation was rotten beyond repair. You can't fix a corrupt structure. You have to tear it down and build something new in its place. I stood up. I walked over to the bookshelf and carefully took down the model of the Grand View Art Museum. I ran my fingers over its delicate miniature facade. Then, with a calm, deliberate motion, I placed it into an empty portfolio case. I did the same with the library and the concert hall. I wouldn't be leaving my children behind. I looked around the office one last time. The sterile box that no longer felt like mine. The desk that now held only a phone and a computer, both useless to me. He thought he was taking everything. My job, my reputation, my future. He was leaving me with the only thing that mattered, the truth, and a 22-year-old blueprint of his every crime. The phone rang again. This time, I answered it. It was the head of security, a gruff but decent man named Frank. He said, "Rebecca, Ezra asked me to escort you out." He sounded embarrassed. I cut him off. I said, "It's all right, Frank. I'm just packing up a few personal things. I'll be at the elevators in 5 minutes." There was a pause. Then he said, "Take your time, Rebecca. Take all the time you need." His small act of defiance, of kindness in the face of Ezra's petty cruelty, was a tiny crack of light in the darkness. It was a reminder that Ezra's corruption hadn't infected everyone. There were still good people at Sterling, people like Frank, people like Leo, and they deserved better. I hung up the phone. The despair was gone. The grief was gone. In their place was a clarity, so profound it felt like a religious experience. I knew exactly what I had to do. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about justice. It was about building something new on a foundation of truth. And the first step was a controlled demolition. The hours after I left the Sterling building are a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. I drove home on autopilot, the city lights smearing across my windshield like wet paint. My apartment, usually a haven of order and quiet, felt vast and empty. I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood in the dark, the portfolio case with my models clutched in my hand, listening to the hum of the city I no longer felt a part of. This is the low point, I suppose. The moment the full weight of the betrayal settles in your bones. It's a heavy, cold thing. It's the realization that the place you dedicated your life to not only doesn't want you, but actively seeks to erase you. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in my favorite armchair, staring out at the skyline, a jagged line of black silhouettes against a bruised purple sky. Each illuminated window was a story, a life, and I felt utterly disconnected from all of them. My professional identity had been my armor for so long, and now, stripped of it, I felt raw, exposed. But foresight is a powerful thing, and for the past 4 years I had been preparing for a war I hoped I would never have to fight. My contingency plan wasn't born of paranoia, but of observation. I had watched Ezra operate. I had seen how he dismantled careers, how he rewrote history to suit his narrative. I knew that if he ever came for me, it wouldn't be a clean cut. It would be an assassination. So, I had built a fortress, not of steel and glass, but of data and documentation. My secret weapon wasn't a single document. It was an ecosystem of evidence. The Black Ledger was more than just a folder on a hard drive. It was a meticulously curated database. I had a dedicated laptop, bought with cash, that had never once been connected to the internet. On it I had a piece of software I'd commissioned from a freelance security expert, a program that allowed me to link and cross-reference thousands of documents, an altered materials invoice from a supplier. I had the original quote linked to it, along with a time-stamped photo from the delivery yard, showing the lower-grade steel being offloaded. A fudged structural analysis report from a junior engineer. I had his first draft, which he had nervously sent me for a second opinion, before Ezra forced him to change it. linked to Ezra's email demanding the revisions. I had audio files. On site, I'd often use my phone's voice memo app to dictate notes, but I would also capture conversations. The site foreman for the Harrison Tower project, a good man named Dave, telling me, Ezra said, to pour the concrete for the third floor slab, even though the forecast shows temperatures dropping below freezing. He said the budget can't take another day's delay. I can't guarantee the cure, Rebecca. I'm telling you this officially. I saved that file. I transcribed it. I linked it to the official weather report from that day, and the subsequent report of hairline fractures that appeared 6 months later, a report Ezra had buried, claiming it was normal settling. I had built a case so detailed, so irrefutable, had it painted a portrait of a man who was not just cutting corners, but actively and knowingly endangering the public for profit. It was a weapon of mass destruction, and I had been sitting on it, hoping the world would never need to see it. That night, as the first gray light of dawn began to creep into my apartment, I booted up the clean laptop. The screen glowed to life, a stark white in the dim room. I opened the program. The interface was simple, elegant. A timeline stretched across the top, marking the last 4 years. Below it, a web of interconnected nodes, each one a piece of evidence. It was a monument to his lies. But evidence alone wasn't enough. A weapon is useless without a strategy to deploy it. My plan had 3 phases. Phase 1, legal fortification. The first call I made was not to the city, but to my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Maria. I had put her on a small retainer 3 years ago, another piece of my contingency plan. I explained the situation in calm, precise terms: the firing, the performance issues smear, the evidence I possessed. She listened without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said, "Rebecca, this is more than a wrongful termination suit. This is a public safety issue. The evidence you're describing, it's explosive. We need to be surgical about this. You need to be surgical about this. The non-disclosure agreement they want you to sign. Don't. It's unenforceable if it's covering up criminal activity, but let's not even give them the argument. We go on the offensive." She was right. I had been thinking defensively, about protecting myself. Maria made me see that the best defense was a meticulous, overwhelming attack. She advised me to create a complete, notarized copy of the entire ledger to establish a chain of custody. She also pointed out something I hadn't considered: my employment contract. When Arthur was still alive, he had insisted all senior architects have a moral rights clause added. It was an unusual stipulation, more common in Europe, which stated that while the firm owned the copyright to the designs, the architect retained the right to be identified as the creator and, crucially, the right to object to any modification that would be prejudicial to their honor or reputation. Cutting corners on my designs, compromising their structural integrity, that was a clear violation of my moral rights. Ezra, in his haste to modernize and cut costs, had probably never even read the fine print of my decades-old contract. It was a beautiful piece of legal poetry, a little gift from Arthur, from beyond the grave. Phase 2, the ally network. You don't survive for 22 years in a competitive field without building relationships, not just with clients, but with colleagues, with suppliers, with the people in the city planning department. I had always made it a point to treat everyone with respect, from the junior draftsman to the head of a development firm. I believed in professional karma. Now it was time to see if that karma would pay dividends. My key ally was inside the company, Leo, but I couldn't put him in a position where he had to actively conspire with me. It was too risky for him. I had to give him a way to help that was deniable. After my call with Maria, I sent him a simple 1-line email from a new anonymous account. It read, "Integrity is a non-negotiable building material. Check the original Olympia Gateway Soil Report, reference 7B. That was it. I was planting a seed. I knew Leo. He was a good architect. He was meticulous. He would be unable to resist pulling that thread. He would find the original geotechnical survey for the Olympia site, and then he would see the revised, doctored version. Ezra was planning to submit with the bid. He would see the lie in black and white. What he did with that information would be his own choice. I was giving him a moral compass and letting him decide which way to point it. My other key ally was external, a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus was the former head of the city's Department of Buildings. He'd retired 2 years ago, disgusted with the growing political influence on what should have been a purely technical and safety-oriented department. He and I had worked together on a dozen projects. We shared a mutual respect for a job done right. I met him for coffee at a small out-of-the-way cafe. I didn't bring the ledger. I didn't need to. I just told him the story. I told him about Ezra, the shortcuts, the firing. I told him I was worried about the Olympia bid. He listened, his face a granite mask. He stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. When I was done, he looked at me and said, "Rebecca, I'm not surprised. I saw the rot starting to set in before I left. Ezra Sterling is a gambler, not a builder. He's been lucky so far. What do you need?" I said. "I need a map. The Oversight Committee is a political body. I need to know who the real players are, who is unbuyable, who has the guts to launch a real investigation." Marcus smiled, a rare, thin smile. He pulled a pen from his pocket and a napkin from the dispenser. He wrote down 3 names. He said, "These are the 3 you can trust. Go to them. But don't go with just accusations. Go with a solution." I asked him what he meant. He said, "You're the best public space architect in this city. Don't just show them how Sterling is broken. Show them how the Olympia Gateway should have been built. Give them a vision of what they're losing if they let this corruption stand." Phase 3. The hidden leverage. My true leverage wasn't just the ledger of past crimes. It was the future. It was the Olympia Gateway project itself. My design for the project wasn't just a set of blueprints. It was a revolutionary new approach to public space design, incorporating sustainable energy systems, advanced materials, and a modular construction technique I had been developing in secret for years. I had patented the core components of this system under my own name, through a shell LLC I had set up with Maria's help over a year ago. It was a detail Ezra had completely missed. He thought he owned the design, but he only owned the superficial drawings. He didn't own the intellectual property that made it work. He didn't own the heart of the machine. He had the car, but I had the keys. Without my proprietary modular system, the project as designed was unbuildable within the proposed budget and timeline. He would have to go back to the drawing board, submitting a far inferior conventional design that would never win against the other bidders. He had fired the one person on Earth who could deliver the project he had promised the city. The plan was coming into focus. It was a 3-pronged attack: the legal challenge based on my contract, the ethical time bomb I had planted with Leo, and the strategic checkmate of the patented design. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of hyper-focused activity. I barely ate. I barely slept. I was a machine building a cage for another machine. With Maria's guidance, I assembled a package for the Oversight Committee. It wasn't a rambling letter from a disgruntled employee. It was a professional, architectural review. It started with Marcus Thorne's advice, a vision. I included the full, detailed renderings and technical specifications for my original Olympia Gateway design, the one based on my patented system. I showed them the project they should be getting. Then I systematically deconstructed Sterling's likely bid. Using the evidence from the Black Ledger, I demonstrated a clear, multi-year pattern of behavior, substituting inferior materials, falsifying safety reports, and compromising structural integrity to inflate profits. I laid out, with chilling precision, exactly where and how Ezra would be forced to cut corners on the Olympia project to meet his numbers. I wasn't just predicting it, I was proving it, using his own past actions as evidence. I concluded the report with a simple, devastating statement. Sterling Construction, under its current leadership, does not possess the ethical framework or the technical integrity to be entrusted with a public project of this magnitude. I sent the package via bonded courier to the 3 names Marcus had given me. I also sent a copy to the city's largest newspaper, to a Pulitzer-winning investigative reporter I had a passing acquaintance with. And then I made my first direct move against Ezra. It was time to take the battlefront public. I drafted a press release. It was short, professional, and brutal. It announced the formation of my new consulting firm, Veritas Designs. Veritas, the Latin word for truth. The release stated that I had left Sterling Construction to focus on projects that prioritized uncompromising structural integrity and ethical design principles. It didn't mention being fired. It didn't mention Ezra. It didn't have to. The subtext was a cannon blast. I timed the release to go out to all the major industry publications at exactly 9 a.m. on Monday morning. The same day the oversight committee would be receiving their packages. The pieces were in place. The traps were set. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again, as I pressed the send button. It was about clearing the ground to build something better. But as I sat back in my chair, watching the sun rise over the city, a small, cold smile touched my lips. The demolition was about to begin. The first tremor hit Sterling Construction at 9:15 a.m. on Monday morning. I didn't see it directly, of course. I wasn't in the building. I was in my apartment, which I had converted into a war room. I had my clean laptop open, my phone on the table, and a fresh pot of coffee brewing. My intel came from Leo. He sent me another cryptic text. The earthquake has started. A few minutes later, an email landed in my anonymous inbox. It was a forwarded message, stripped of Leo's name. It was a company-wide email from Ezra, sent at 9:12 a.m. The subject line was Important Announcement, regarding Rebecca Shaw. The body of the email was a masterpiece of panicked corporate doublespeak. It talked about my sudden departure to pursue other opportunities. It wished me well in my future endeavors. It was a clumsy, transparent attempt at damage control, a reaction to my press release, which had clearly begun to circulate. He was trying to get ahead of the narrative, to frame my exit as amicable. He was too late. The second tremor hit an hour later. This one was public. The city's top industry blog, Metropolis Architecture Daily, ran my press release as their lead story. But they added their own commentary. The editor, a sharp woman who had followed my career for years, noted that the timing of my departure, just weeks before the Olympia bid, was highly unusual. She wrote, "Rebecca Shaw has been the creative engine of Sterling for 2 decades. Her leaving now raises serious questions about the firm's stability and direction as it prepares for the most significant public project in a generation." The article was professional, but the implication was devastating. It was a signal to the entire industry that something was wrong at Sterling. The quiet, competent architect, the one who never sought the spotlight, had just stepped into it, and she had done so with a purpose. The phone started ringing. It was former colleagues, suppliers, even a few friendly competitors. They all had the same message. "What's going on, Rebecca? We saw the article. Are you okay?" I was polite, but vague. I said it was just time for a change, time to get back to my roots. I didn't need to say more. My reputation for being understated and drama-averse meant that my sudden public move was more powerful than any screaming tirade. The silence from me was louder than any accusation. Inside Sterling, the panic was escalating. Leo sent me another update, a screenshot of the internal company chat. It was a hive of confusion and anxiety. People were asking questions. Why wasn't there a farewell party for Rebecca? Why did this feel so sudden? Ezra's lie about an amicable departure was already fraying at the seams. His authority was built on a perception of control, of being 10 steps ahead. My press release had shown that he was reactive, caught off guard. He had lost control of the narrative. The big one, the seismic shockwave, hit at 11:30 a.m. An official courier from the City Oversight Committee arrived at Sterling Tower. According to Leo, he walked straight past the front desk and headed to the executive floor. He hand-delivered a sealed envelope to Ezra's personal assistant. Leo, whose desk was just down the hall, saw Ezra take the envelope into his office. He didn't see Ezra's face, but he saw his assistant's. She looked like she had seen a ghost. 10 minutes later, A summons went out to the entire senior management team and the Olympia bid team. Emergency meeting. Ezra's office. Now, the trap had been sprung. The package I sent, my vision for the project, my deconstruction of Sterling's business practices, the mountain of evidence from the Black Ledger, was now in the hands of the three people Marcus Thorne had told me I could trust. They weren't just investigating a disgruntled employee's claims. They were investigating a formal, detailed architectural review that questioned the fundamental integrity of a major city bidder. The beauty of my first move was its deniability. I hadn't accused Ezra of anything publicly. I had simply announced the formation of my own firm with a mission statement that stood in stark contrast to his practices. It was an act of professional self-determination, but it was also a perfectly aimed torpedo. The Oversight Committee's letter would have informed Ezra that an official inquiry had been launched into Sterling's bidding eligibility and past project compliance, prompted by newly submitted materials. It wouldn't mention my name. It wouldn't have to. Ezra would know. He would look at the date on the inquiry and connect it to my departure. He would see the press release and the timing. He would know that the firewall he thought he had dismantled had just fallen on his head. I can only imagine the scene in that meeting room. The panic, the confusion. Ezra trying to project calm and control, telling them it was a routine inquiry, a political game from a rival bidder. But his senior team weren't fools. They had worked with me for years. They knew my work ethic. They knew my integrity. My sudden departure, followed by a city inquiry, would not look like a coincidence to them. They would start asking questions. They would start looking at the Olympia bid documents with fresh, suspicious eyes. And that's when Ezra's real nightmare would begin. Because the bid documents were built on a foundation of lies, and I had just handed the city the original blueprints. Later that afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Dave, the site foreman from the Harrison Tower project, the one whose voice I had recorded. He sounded nervous. He said, "Rebecca, it's Dave. I heard you left. I hope you're doing okay. I got a weird call from legal. They're asking for all my old daily logs from the Harrison job. They wanted to know if I ever filed any formal complaints about the concrete pours." I told him to be careful, to just tell the truth. He said, "I know, that's why I'm calling you. I always keep my own copies, Rebecca, always, just like you taught me." My heart swelled with a fierce, protective pride. This was the network Arthur had built, a network of honest, hard-working people who believed in doing the job right. Ezra had never understood that the firm's true strength wasn't in its balance sheet, but in the character of its people. And now, those people were a silent army, each holding a small piece of the truth. Ezra was trapped. He couldn't withdraw the bid without admitting something was wrong, which would trigger a massive stock drop and shareholder panic. But he couldn't proceed with the bid, because he knew an investigation was underway that would inevitably uncover the fraud. He was cornered, and cornered animals do stupid, desperate things. His panic was my greatest asset. He would start making mistakes, trying to cover his tracks, putting pressure on people who would crack and talk. All I had to do was remain silent, calm, professional. I was no longer the defendant in his imaginary case of performance issues. I was the architect of his downfall, and he was walking right into the structure I had designed for him. I poured another cup of coffee and sat back, listening to the quiet hum of my laptop. The silence was the most powerful weapon in my arsenal. It was the space in which his own lies would echo until they became deafening. It wasn't about revenge. It was about letting the natural laws of gravity take over. He had built a house of cards on a fault line, and I had just given the ground a little nudge. The fallout from the city's inquiry was immediate and catastrophic for Sterling construction. It was like a slow-motion demolition, where the building groans and twists before it finally collapses. The first thing to go was the trust of their clients. My move, while quiet, had created a ripple of uncertainty in the marketplace. The high-profile clients, the ones with their own reputations to protect, started getting nervous. The first call came on Tuesday. It was from Mr. Harrison, the developer behind the Harrison Tower, a billion-dollar residential project. That was Sterling's flagship account. He called me on my personal cell. He got straight to the point. He said, "Rebecca, what the hell is going on over there? Ezra tells me you left to start your own little boutique firm. He makes it sound like you got tired of the big leagues. But I've known you for 15 years. You don't just walk away from a project like Olympia. And now I'm hearing whispers of a city inquiry." I chose my words carefully. I said, "Mr. Harrison, I have the utmost respect for the work we did together on your tower. My new firm is focused on ensuring that kind of quality and integrity is the standard for every project, not the exception." It was all I needed to say. I hadn't badmouthed Ezra. I had praised our past work together, subtly reminding him that I was the common denominator in that success, and I had drawn a clear line in the sand between my new firm's values, and by implication, Sterling's current ones. He was silent for a moment. Then he said, "The final phase of our project, the rooftop pavilion. The designs are yours. I want you to finish it." I told him that would be complicated, that Sterling held the contract. He cut me off. He said, "Let me worry about the contracts. I'm not letting Ezra's B team touch the crown jewel of my building. I'll be in touch." He hung up. This was more than just one client defecting. Mr. Harrison was a bellwether for the entire industry. His moving the final phase of his project to my fledgling, one-woman company would be a massive vote of no confidence in Sterling. It was a signal that the brand was tarnished. Meanwhile, Ezra was making his desperate countermove. He tried to fight back on the legal front. On Wednesday, a letter arrived from Sterling's high-priced corporate law firm. It was a cease and desist, thick with legal threats. It accused me of breach of contract, of tortious interference, and of stealing proprietary information. It demanded I shutter my new firm and retract my press release. It was a bluff, and a clumsy one at that. My lawyer, Maria, laughed when I read it to her. She said, "This is beautiful. This is a panic attack in legalese. They have no idea you have the moral rights clause, do they? And they have no idea about the ledger. They're firing cannons in the dark." She drafted a response that was a model of surgical precision. It simply stated that I rejected all their claims, that my new firm was operating legally, and that any attempt to intimidate me would be met with a vigorous and comprehensive legal response, including counterclaims. As a final touch, she attached a copy of my original employment contract with the moral rights clause circled in red ink. She said, "That little circle is going to give their entire legal team heartburn." Ezra's next move was even more desperate. He tried to buy my silence. On Thursday, I received a call from him directly. It was the first time we had spoken since he fired me. His tone was completely different. The condescending arrogance was gone, replaced by a false, cloying warmth. He said, "Rebecca, look, I think this has all been a terrible misunderstanding. Nerves are frayed with the Olympia bid, as under a lot of pressure. I may have acted hastily." I listened, saying nothing. He went on, "What Sterling needs, what the city needs, is for you to be on that Olympia project. I'm prepared to offer you a full partnership, head of the entire design division, a 7-figure salary, and a signing bonus. We'll put out a joint press release, say you took a brief sabbatical to set up a passion project, and now you're back home where you belong." It was breathtaking. The sheer, unadulterated gall of the man. He thought he could just write a check and make it all go away. He thought my integrity, my life's work, had a price tag. This was the moment, the turning point where I could have taken the easy way out. I could have accepted his offer, returned a hero, and become fabulously wealthy. But all I could think about was Leo's terrified face. I thought about the hairline cracks in the Harrison Tower. I thought about Arthur's voice, talking about trust. I let the silence hang in the air for a few seconds, letting him squirm. Then I said, "Ezra, is this offer being extended before or after you told the oversight committee that my performance issues made me unfit for my job?" The line went dead quiet. I had him. He had no idea I knew about the inquiry, let alone that I was the cause of it. My question was a direct confirmation. He stammered, I don't know what you're talking about, I said. Yes, you do. You're not offering me a partnership, Ezra. You're trying to buy my testimony. My price is a little higher than that. I want a public apology for the lies you told about my work, and I want you to voluntarily withdraw the Olympia bid and resign from Sterling Construction, effective immediately. There was a strangled noise on the other end of the line, a mix of rage and disbelief. He hissed, "You will regret this, Rebecca. You have no idea who you're dealing with," I replied, calmly. "I've known who I'm dealing with for the last 5 years, Ezra. The problem is, you've never known who you're dealing with." Then I hung up. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. He was no longer the one holding the cards. He was the one being played, and he had just revealed his entire desperate hand. The war wasn't over, but the decisive battle had just been won. The final confrontation wasn't in a boardroom, filled with shouting lawyers and dramatic accusations. That was Ezra's world, a world of noise and bluster. My victory happened in silence, in the calm, quiet space I had created. A week after I rejected his pathetic offer, the Oversight Committee released its preliminary findings. It was a public document, a bombshell that sent shockwaves through the city's political and business communities. The report, citing an unprecedented and meticulously detailed submission from a senior industry source, recommended that Sterling Construction be immediately disqualified from the Olympia Gateway bid. It went further. It recommended a full forensic audit of all of Sterling's public projects from the past 5 years, and referred the matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal investigation. The senior industry source was, of course, me, but my name was never mentioned. The power of the report was in its anonymity, its cold, factual precision. It wasn't the work of a person, it was the work of the truth. The next day, Sterling's stock price plummeted by 60%. The board of directors, a collection of old money investors who cared more about their reputations than about Ezra's ego, called an emergency meeting. I didn't need an insider to know what happened. The outcome was plastered across every financial news site by noon. Ezra Sterling resigns as CEO of Sterling Construction, effective immediately. He wasn't fired. He was allowed the fig leaf of a resignation, a quiet, ignominious end. I felt nothing. No surge of triumph, no satisfying rush of vindication, just a quiet, profound sense of rightness, a sense of a system, however slowly and imperfectly, correcting itself. The house had been condemned. The demolition was complete. 2 weeks later, I was in my new office. It wasn't much, just a small rented space with a good drafting table and a lot of natural light. My firm, Veritas Designs, had 3 employees, me, my new administrative assistant, and Leo. He had resigned from Sterling the day after Ezra did, turning down a desperate counteroffer to stay. He walked into my office and said, "I checked Soil Report 7B. You were right. I want to build things that last." I hired him on the spot. My phone rang. It was the office of the mayor. His chief of staff was on the line. She said, "Miss Shaw, the mayor has read the Oversight Committee's report. He's also seen the original design proposal you included. He was impressed. The city is officially reopening the bidding process for the Olympia Gateway project, but we'd like to invite Veritas Designs to enter into an exclusive negotiation. We want your vision, Miss Shaw, uncompromised." And that's when I finally felt it. Not revenge, not vindication, but a sense of arrival, a sense of the world clicking back into its proper alignment. I spent the next year of my life doing what I was born to do. I built Veritas Designs from the ground up, not on spreadsheets and margins, but on trust and talent. I built a team of the best and brightest, people who had fled Sterling and other firms like it, all of us refugees from a culture of mediocrity, and together, we built the Olympia Gateway. It stands today as the centerpiece of our city, a soaring structure of glass and light and green space. It's safe, it's beautiful, and it's honest. I saw Ezra one last time. It was about a year ago. I was walking through the main plaza of the Gateway, doing a final walkthrough before the official dedication. He was sitting on a bench, alone. He looked smaller, diminished, The expensive suit hung on him like a costume. He saw me, and for a moment his face contorted into a familiar mask of rage. But then it just collapsed. He looked away, a man defeated by a world he no longer understood, a world where quality and truth could eventually win. I didn't say a word to him. I just kept walking. There was nothing left to say. My vindication wasn't in his defeat. It was all around me. It was in the laughter of children playing in the fountains, in the quiet conversations of people enjoying the public space, in the solid, unyielding feel of the ground beneath my feet. The foundation was strong. The structure was sound. My name wasn't on a plaque anywhere. Not yet. But it was carved into the soul of the place. It was a quiet victory, the best kind. It wasn't about tearing him down. It was about building something better in his place. It was never about revenge. It was about the architecture of justice. So here I am now, sitting in my office, looking out at a city I helped build, and then rebuild. The Olympia Gateway is more than just a project. It's a testament. It's proof that you don't have to accept a broken system. You don't have to tolerate corruption as the cost of doing business. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to step away from a structure that is rotten and start laying a new foundation, one based on your own non-negotiable principles. My story isn't unique. I know there are countless people out there, in every industry, who have been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. People who have had their work stolen or their integrity questioned by those in power who value profit over people. You may feel invisible, you may feel powerless, but your competence is your power, your integrity is your fortress, and your documentation is your ammunition. Don't ever believe that you are just a cog in someone else's machine. You are the architect of your own life, your own career. You draw the lines. You set the specifications. For 22 years, I tried to fix a house that was built on lies. My greatest success didn't come from shoring up its walls, but from having the courage to walk away and build my own cathedral. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclamation. I reclaimed my work, my name, and my own sense of purpose. And in doing so, I built a reality where I no longer had to fight for a seat at the table. I built the damn table, and I get to decide who sits with me. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your work and your worth were being held hostage by a toxic environment, please give this video a like. It lets me know that these stories matter. And leave a comment below. Share your own experience, not the details, but the feeling. It's important for us to know we are not alone in these fights. Share this video with someone who might need to hear this message, someone who might be on the verge of giving up, to remind them of the power they hold. And finally, if you want to hear more stories about reclaiming your power and finding justice in a world that isn't always fair, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Thank you for listening.